The first explanation survives for about a minute. A supermassive black hole becomes active. Material falls inward. The material heats up. The center becomes bright. Simple. Then the measurements keep moving. The energy output continues climbing, while the visible structure barely changes. The flare grows stronger. The explanation does not. An old image shows a dark region with almost nothing to notice. Then a newer image arrives, and the same location is glowing. Not gradually. Not after a long visible buildup. The brightening is already underway. At first, the change seems simple. A faint glow appears where the darkness used to be. Then the glow strengthens faster than expected. Frame by frame, the center becomes harder to ignore. It was not supposed to wake up like this. If this were ordinary activity, there should be signs leading up to it, some visible progression, some warning. Instead, the result appears before the story explaining it. The dark center flickers into a hard white point. For a moment, the image is just an image, a bright core surrounded by the rest of the galaxy. Nothing more. The surrounding stars remain where they were. The larger structure still looks familiar. Then the comparison begins. The older archive image no longer feels reassuring. The darkness that once looked stable now looks incomplete. The quiet record becomes the suspicious record. We rely on quiet space staying quiet. We treat dormancy as a kind of control, but dormancy is not the same as control. And if the old darkness was not proof of safety, then the next question is no longer whether something changed. It is what fed it. The bright point does not stay a point for long. What first looked like a single burst now appears connected to the surrounding core. A bright disk forms around the black hole. The light concentrates near the center, then begins pushing outward into the region around it. The dormant supermassive black hole is releasing extreme energy. The glow spreads beyond the original location. The central core begins to look different, as though the entire system is responding to one compact region. The source occupies a small part of the image, yet it begins shaping a much larger one. What looks local behaves system-wide. The first glow was not a finished occurrence. It was the beginning of domination. The black hole's size on screen hides its actual power, and the gap between source and consequence keeps widening. The question is no longer why the center became bright. It is whether any explanation can keep pace with what that brightness is already doing. A clean structure begins to appear. Around the darkness, a bright disk takes shape. Material circles the black hole, glowing as it moves. The flare that seemed abrupt now has a visible form. Instead of a single burst, there is a process the eye can follow. The supermassive black hole may simply be feeding. For the first time, the situation feels understandable. Material falls inward. The material heats. The heated disk shines. The brightening follows. Falling material can become intensely hot before crossing the event horizon. The disk provides a visible framework for the flare. The model seems to fit what the galaxy is showing. The earlier brightness no longer looks like a sudden shock. It starts to resemble a process already in motion. The threat feels smaller because it now has a familiar shape. The image remains steady. The glowing disk continues circling the darkness. The bright center still dominates the core. That is exactly why confidence begins to grow. If feeding causes the flare, then the disk should explain the rise. The explanation works only as long as that assumption continues to hold. Attention shifts from the flare itself to the model describing it. The mind starts treating the situation as predictable. The glowing disk begins to feel like an answer. But if confidence is now attached to that answer, then the next failure will not come from the brightness. It will come from the explanation people have already started trusting. It continues circling the darkness. Its shape remains familiar. Its size appears limited. At first glance, nothing seems wrong with the explanation built around it. Then the numbers keep moving. The energy curve rises while the visible structure barely changes. The flare grows stronger, but the disk does not appear to grow with it. The relationship that seems stable begins to separate. Then the gap widens. The supermassive black hole outpaces its own explanation. The fuel does not match the fire. If the disk explains the flare, the output should track the visible fuel. Instead, the energy continues climbing while the structure used to explain it remains largely the same. The graph rises after the explanation should have stabilized it.
Wait. The flux is rising.
The image has not become stranger.
This shouldn't be happening.
The interpretation has. Correct-looking systems can still mislead judgment. The familiar shape encourages confidence even as its predictions begin falling behind reality. The clean disk that seemed to solve the problem now creates a new one. Seeing a mechanism is not the same as understanding behavior. The event is no longer challenging the object alone, it is challenging the explanation wrapped around it. Trust begins collapsing before the brightness does. And once the model falls behind the output, the question is no longer whether the black hole is active. It is how much of what looked understandable was never actually understood at all. The wide view returns. Stars remain scattered across the darkness. The larger structure appears steady. Only the center is different. A faint altered glow still lingers where the change began. It is not dominating the image anymore. It is simply there, quietly occupying the place that once looked empty. Then the old archive image appears again. Old dark center fading into altered center. The comparison is simple. One image shows darkness. The other shows what came after. The difference is small enough to miss at a glance, yet impossible to ignore once seen. The original darkness becomes the most unsettling image. A supermassive black hole can remain hidden inside a galaxy for long periods before activity becomes visible. Looking back, the absence of change no longer feels comforting. It feels incomplete. The silence was the unstable part. We trust what stays quiet because we cannot watch everything forever. Calm becomes a shortcut for safety. The mind accepts stillness and moves on. But the galaxy no longer allows that conclusion. If quiet means stable, this view should feel safe again. Instead, the calm feels temporary. The center carries a different meaning now. The event was never only about activity. It was about trusting in activity. Every earlier frame has shifted. The dark center that once looked harmless now feels like a warning that arrived before anyone knew it was a warning. And once that idea takes hold, even the calmest cosmic center becomes harder to look at the same way again.